Here I've got Korg's Opsix, a modern day FM synth, and here I've got the original DX7 from 1983. And as you heard there, pretty closely matched. Now the Opsix can load in all the patches from the DX7, so I've loaded into this all the original DX7 ROM-A cartridge, and I've also got that loaded in the ROM-A cartridge on this as well. So that piano there was the DX7 versus the Opsix, and very similar indeed. I just had to make a few little minor tweaks on the Opsix. When I first loaded the patch, the DX7 sounded like it had a lot more movement in it. But just a little bit of detune on this. Let's go to OP1, add a bit more detune. And they're not identical, obviously. But not bad at all, actually. And you can hear there we've got the 12-bit samples. When you load in the DX7 patches into the Opsix, it uses the 12-bit sine wave. And you can hear that there are slight differences, as I say. Now on the Opsix we can change the levels of each of the operators really simply. Get a bit more tines with operator 2. As it modulates operator 1. So actually the Opsix is really great for fine-tuning the sounds. It's really simple to do. Whereas on the DX7, it's a lot more of a stress to go and change the individual levels of the operators. You'd have to go into edit mode, and then we've got the operator output level here, and we flick through the different operators. So let's go to operator 2. You probably can't see any of this on the camera, but it's having a very similar effect, isn't it? The big difference on the DX7 is that you don't get real-time control over the sounds. It only changes it once you've pressed it again, so as you might expect, it's so much simpler to edit tones on the Opsix. And if you watch my previous video on this, just showing you how to make basic FM tones using the native software, you can see quite how easy it is. And the native software interacts with the Opsix hardware really good. It's a bit like an editor for it almost. If you want an editor for the DX7, use Dext, which is free, so that's quite cool as well. And before I dig into the sounds a little bit more, a quick note on the hardware. The DX7 is extremely heavy. It's difficult to use, obviously, as I've just said. The Opsix is extremely light, maybe a little bit too light. It's quite plasticky. And it's super light, and obviously it hasn't got a 5-octave keyboard. I quite like the lightness of it. I quite like that it's smaller than the DX7. I can put more in the studio, but it is nice to have the keys. Keys on the DX7 were a little bit rattly, I thought, when I first played it, but once you turn things up, you don't hear the rattles as much, and it springs back a little bit nicer than it does on the Korg. The Opsix has probably got a little bit lighter touch on the keyboard. It's a bit softer, but I think this has hardened over time. But it does feel nice to play the DX7. It's a great keyboard considering it's 40 years old. The knobs and sliders on the Opsix feel okay. There's a fair amount of resistance. All in all, it feels like it's been well designed and it looks quite nice. Mess around with the sliders now so it doesn't sound the same, but all in all, as far as feel goes, it feels light. It doesn't feel like a big hefty top quality top end synth, but it feels fine. I've got no issues with it whatsoever. So let's dig into a couple more of the sounds, shall we? Definite differences there. I much prefer the DX7 actually. It sounds sort of richer, fuller, creamier and smoother. In fact, this sounds like the envelopes are a bit snappier, so let's just change the envelopes. I'll show you how easy it is to do these things. So go into envelope, then we've got the decay, we go through the different operators. So which one's got a snappy one? This one does. Still haven't got that quite right, have I? The levels of these operators are all a little bit all over the place. And that sounded slightly different as well, but both of those were playing the DX7. I was controlling the DX7 with the OP6 then. So the actual velocity sensitivity of the keyboard's slightly different, so it is difficult to get them absolutely identical. I've changed the velocity curve on this, down from 4 to 3. But I'm still getting a lot more sensitivity out of the OP6, and I think maybe it's just because the DX7's old. If I knock it down any further, then on other sounds I don't quite get the brightness from the DX7, so it's a bit hit and miss, to be honest. Again, this is all playing the DX7. I'm not playing the OP6 at all at the minute. So I've really got to adjust my playing in order for them to sound the same. So I thought, well, actually, let's just try something from scratch that doesn't use velocity sensitivity. So let's try making something from an initial patch. So we're starting off from the same place. Let's turn all the other operators off and just have 1 and 2 playing. So in here, we just turn them off like that. There we go. And on this, just turn them all down, leave 1 and 2 on. That's what I was about to do. And do the same on this. So we're going to edit, output level, operator 2. So we're getting slightly different tones there, aren't we? But it sounds like we've got an envelope on the OP6. Let's just check that out. We'll go into levels. There we go. Let's turn the sustain level up to full on all of them, or just 1 and 2 really, isn't it? Apart from the levels being different, they're not bad, are they? I'd say they're pretty much indistinguishable. I don't think I'd be able to tell one from the other in a blind test. Well, no, I wouldn't be able to tell one from another in a blind test. Let's add some feedback. So if we go into algorithm 2, and on algorithm 2, oscillator 2 feeds back onto itself. And it sort of turns it from a sine into a sawtooth. All the way to noise. On the DX7, we go into algorithm and we change it to algorithm 2. And then we go into the feedback. The feedback amounts on 0. We only get 8 options, 0 to 7. So they're not actually that far off. We're dividing 100 by 8 there, so we're not getting integers, and then we've only got integers between 0 and 99 on this. Actually, I'm quite surprised how close it's getting. So without going through all the algorithms and trying and feedback on different things, I think we can see that it's very close actually. I mean, if you're a DX7 purist, you might hear slight little things here and there that aren't to your liking, but actually from my perspective, I think that's pretty darn close. Should we try some other of the standard sounds? Let's go into something like the brass, shall we? The DX7 sounds a bit brighter there, isn't it? But again, I think I could probably get it a little bit closer, given a bit more time. Well, that's completely different, isn't it? God knows what's happening there. Let's try the final brass patch. Again, slight differences. I think I can hear the envelopes being slightly different again. Nice bit of breath sound on that, isn't there? That's what operator 4's doing. So does it sound like a DX7? It's getting pretty close. It's not a DX7 clone, but I think to all intents and purposes, loading these sounds into this, you know, you're getting very, very, very close results. And the fact that you can manipulate things so easily on the OP6 is really good. Although I am now messing around with a sound that doesn't sound too similar. Let's try another. Again, not the same. Mellower on the DX7. Sounds a bit fuller on the low end. Sounds much richer on the DX7, that. Running out of keys. Yeah, I much prefer the sound of that on the DX7. Let's see if I can manipulate this a little bit to get it closer. Yeah, this OP4 seems to be adding a bit more body. Getting closer already. Except for down here, it's really, really bright. That's weird. So yeah, it's just a bit odd that that's so much brighter on the DX7. Let's try one more piano, shall we? Again, DX7 sounding nicer. But those sounds were tweaked for that particular engine, not for this engine. But I do think with a little bit more playing around, we can get this better. Really loud, that, isn't it? Operator 3 is giving it that harsh brightness. Now this one's sounding fuller, now the OP6 is. So you can hear the character in there, and without spending hours and hours going through each of the tones trying to match them precisely. I do think I'm getting them a little bit closer on the fly really quickly as you watch me do it. Not bad, but what are my overall final thoughts? The OP6 isn't a DX7 clone. It doesn't sound exactly the same, but you can get it very close. And you know, whether you think if it sounds like it in the mix is good enough, I don't know. But overall, I'm really impressed by the OP6. When you've been trying to use the DX7, you're trying to program things on the DX7, this just invites you in to play the DX7. It's failing light in here at the minute, and I'm trying to see what it says on the livery on the front panel, what's printed in purple on brown. And on this, it's just super simple to find everything really quickly, and as soon as you get this bit of hardware, you can find your way around the sounds super quickly. DX7 is an absolute pain, as it's renowned for being. Would I prefer to keep the DX7 or the OP6? If I was going to spend the money on an OP6 or a DX7, where would I spend the money? I think almost 100% I would go for the OP6, because I've not even touched on all the other stuff this can do. I mean, let's just put a initial patch on, for example. Let's go into the effects. That's just a sine wave with a bit of reverb. The reverb on it is the Korg Submarine. They've got that on the Minilog XD as well. Really like that. The DX7 obviously can't touch that. The OP6 has got so much more going on. It's got those effects, it's got effects in the operators, it's got different starting waves for the operators, you've got a sequencer, you've got an ARP, you've got 6 LFOs, lots more things to look at. And if you are interested in it, do take a look at the native app, because it gives you a really good overview. Because, well, it's a good overview. It's the same synth engine, and you can understand exactly what the OP6 can do. So for sound design, for a useful synth for the studio, the OP6 all the way. The DX7 is there for its vintage charm and its looks and its sort of classic feel. But overall, I'll get the OP6 over the DX7 any day of the week. So if you enjoyed that, please think about subscribing, ring the bell, join me on Patreon. If you're on Patreon, I've done a little sound bank of 36 sounds for the OP6 and the DX7 that you might be interested in, sort of more usable sort of sounds that I'd use, not trumpets, flutes, piccolos or trombones. So I will see you next time.